Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Just a few apologies there, some technical issues at the beginning, so apologies for keeping you waiting, but it's going to be worth it. So I'd like to welcome you to today's event, which is on clean energy and innovation, and it's part of the Greenway campaign that AmChemU just launched this month, in fact, last week. It's actually one of a four-part series where we're going to touch on some of the most important sectors of the economy for the green transition. Now, just a little bit of minor housekeeping as we start here. We are recording the event. It is live recording so that we can use parts of this on social media afterwards. So just wanted to make sure that you're all aware of that. So with that, we have a great program of speakers for today, including, as you can see here, Chris Delaney, President for Goodyear, and Goodyear is also a member company of AmCham EU, and Chris is also chair of our AmCham EU Executive Council. We're very excited to welcome, and we're going to kick off, in fact, with Varun Sivaram very shortly. As you can see, Senior Director for Clean Energy Innovation and Competitiveness and Senior Advisor to Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry. Very honoured to have you here today, Varun. And then after that, we will be having our panel, led by our chairman, Zege Verkouteren, who from Johnson & Johnson, who will be joined by two panelists. You can see here, Annika Hedberg from CEPS, European Policy Centre, Head of Sustainable Prosperity, and Svetlana Penkova, MEP, S&D. So with that, before we dig in, let me just a brief introduction, if I may. To those of you who don't know me, my name is Susan Danger. I'm CEO of AmCham EU. I'd just like to give you a very brief introduction to AmCham EU, because I know we have people from all over here. We represent over 150 American companies invested in and committed to Europe, many for over 100 years. And importantly, we have two overarching objectives. The first one is to build an even stronger and more competitive European Union. And the second one is to maintain and strengthen the transatlantic relationship. So it's great that today's event is truly transatlantic. We are a non-partisan organization, and our primary goal really is to act as a bridge builder in all ways. Really try to bring together the two sides of the Atlantic in our role as a trusted policy partner, and to facilitate that dialogue between DC and Brussels. So again, delighted to have Varun on the line with us today. So as the title of today's event shows, the green transition is indeed an absolute strategic priority for Europe, and it's one that our member companies are already actively engaged in, have been actually for a long time. Also, I'd like to point out that very early in its mandate, the European Commission identified the green transition of the European economy as a key priority to mitigate climate change. I think, though, importantly, with the pandemic and well, now we hope the descent of the pandemic onto our shores and the continuation of this pandemic has also brought to light this sort of humanitarian, socioeconomic crisis of really epic proportions. But as we slowly start to see, and we believe we're seeing this, we hope the end of the tunnel in Europe, the green transition is very much at the forefront of Europe's economic recovery plan, and we believe also the global recovery plan. This is very much evidenced by what's called here the Fit for 55 legislative package, which is revising the EU's climate targets for 2030 upwards. And this is due to be adopted actually this week. Now, AmCham EU wants to show how our members are supporting these EU ambitions to reach a net zero economy by 2050. And this is why last week we launched our campaign called The Greenway, Innovating for Europe's Sustainable Future. And you can see here some of the contributors to that campaign. It contains, in fact, already more than 35 initiatives from a number of our economies, a number of our companies, focused on a broad range of initiatives, whether it is decarbonizing energy. You can actually see here on this slide how many stories we have for each of these. So 14 for decarbonizing energy. We currently have 6 for building sustainable food systems. We have 6 also for innovating sustainable mobility solutions, and 10 for making the economy circular. So there's a huge amount of work going on in this area, absolutely enormous, and really spans the breadth of the economy. And so I just want to emphasize that our member base is really already investing in the innovations of the future that can hold the key, we believe, to the successful green transition. So I encourage you all to check out those innovations, those initiatives that are underway, and they're all showcased on our platform, which is investidineurope.eu/greenway. You can, if you want to, also scan the QR code, which is shown there on your screen, just to navigate there directly. And of course, use the hashtag EU Greenway to follow our campaign across social media. Now, at this point, I believe we're having some camera issues with Chris Delaney, so we're trying to sort those out. So we've swapped our speakers over, and we're going to be now going straight in, and it's my absolute honor to now introduce Varun. So with that, I would like to introduce our speaker from the United States. He is one of the world's foremost experts in clean energy technology with experience across corporate, public and academic sectors. And the bio has already gone out. It's really impressive. Also CTO of a multi-billion-dollar firm. He's been senior policy advisor to a city and a state. He's a physicist, a professor and an author, but here in his current role, he advises indeed Special Presidential Envoy to Climate, John Kerry. And as I said, he is also Senior Director for Clean Energy, Innovation and Competitiveness. It's a real honor to have you with us today, Varun Sivaram. Over to you, the floor is yours. I know we're going to hear from you and then hopefully have a little bit of a conversation. So over to you, Varun, welcome.
Terrific, Susan. Well, thank you so much for having me to the to AmCham, to the American Chamber in the EU. This is a wonderful event. I'm very excited to do this with you. And let me also please share the regards of Secretary John Kerry, who sincerely believes in the importance of the US-EU transatlantic relationship and the importance that an organization like yours and your member companies are doing, which is connecting decarbonization around the world with American jobs and prosperity and competitiveness. It is critical to the work we do. Let me just take a few minutes to talk through some of the priorities that Secretary Kerry and the Biden administration have, the admiration we have for the climate ambition that the European Union's demonstrated, and why we think this is a massive opportunity for American companies and indeed your members. And thank you again, Susan, for the very kind introduction. As you know, Secretary Kerry represents President Biden as a special presidential envoy. It's a new position, and therefore he's been going around the world working with our key partner countries, the major economies or emitters, to raise their climate ambition. And President Biden made it clear that climate change was going to be a core priority of the administration from day one. He rejoined the Paris Agreement. Our relationship with Europe has been particularly special. You'll recall that the US and the European Union issued a joint statement when Secretary Kerry visited Brussels. It was his first foreign trip in office. More recently, Secretary Kerry and Franz Timmermans inaugurated the US-EU High-Level Climate Action Group. So we have, one of multiple high-level dialogues that are going on to make sure that we are synced and collaborating to bring our strengths to bear. The US and the European Union also collaborate in a range of other multilateral fora, from the G7, and you saw the communique that came out, the upcoming G20 to in the United Nations, and finally with COP26 coming up at the end of the year, kind of the capstone event of this year of climate action. President Biden and Secretary Kerry kicked off this critical year with the Leaders Summit in April of 2021 this year. And you saw there that 55% of the world's countries measured by GDP came to the table with existing or pre-existing pledges to limit global warming to 1.5C limit, or at least keep that goal alive. Those commitments are consistent with the 1.5C threshold. Now the focus shifts to making sure that the remaining 45% of the world also can come on board. And it's critical that, ahead of COP26, we bring as many major economies, major emitters on board as possible. Because the challenge is pretty stark when we think about what the clean energy transition means. The International Energy Agency released a seminal net zero report earlier this year, in which they laid out very quantitatively what we'd have to do. Quantitatively, we'd have to build the world's biggest solar farm every single day for the next 10 years to ramp up to the deployment targets they've set for renewable energy. That's more than 1,000 gigawatts a year around the world by 2030. Similarly, it's not just the deployment of renewable or currently existing technologies, it's also the demonstration, the scale up, and the development of new technologies that are perhaps just emerging and haven't been commercially deployed. 50% of the emissions reductions to get to net zero by 2050, according to the IEA, need to come from those technologies that haven't even made it to markets yet. And that's why when we think about what we have to do in this critical decade through 2030, it's not just deploy the tools we already have, but it's scaling up and developing the tools that we need to have for net zero. That means 150 million tons of hydrogen production from clean sources in the middle of this decade. And it means investing in a range of technologies from energy storage to carbon capture and sequestration to nuclear energy, to advanced renewables, advanced transportation, carbon removal, direct air capture, a range of digital technologies, and the list goes on. I can keep spewing these out. That there's a range of things that we need to do, particularly to help on those hard to abate sectors, your cement, steel, petrochemicals, long distance aviation, freight, shipping, etc. So we have our work cut out for us, but I'm thrilled to say that Europe has demonstrated just signal climate leadership. We heard a little bit from Susan up front. The ETS, the emissions trading system, has led the world, and now we're really seeing prices that bite. It's sending a clear demand signal that clean and green technologies are what we need. As Susan mentioned, we are looking forward to seeing what is in this Fit for 55 package, but it certainly looks like it's going to be a very ambitious package to back up the European Union's high ambition. And I want to zero in on innovation. Innovation's special to me. I care a lot about developing this next generation of technologies. I was thrilled to see that at the launch of the Mission Innovation 2.0 just a couple weeks ago, the European Union and Breakthrough Energy announced a partnership. I think we'll hear more from Breakthrough Energy later in the panel today on funding demonstration projects for some critical technologies, sustainable aviation fuels and long duration storage and direct air capture. We also heard that the ETS, again, which generates revenue, is going to at least partially support an innovation fund. And when the European Union did a call for proposals for innovation demonstration projects, 311 proposals, numbering more than 20 billion euros, came out of that RFP. So very impressive work. Now, the United States' goals and the goals of the Biden administration dovetail very nicely with what Europe is doing. As you heard from President Biden when he announced the American Jobs Plan, in addition to deploying clean energy at a massive scale, President Biden also wants to invest $15 billion in demonstration projects, including clean hydrogen. He wants to get our power sector to carbon free by 2035, and our overall economy to net zero by 2050. And there's a range of metrics along the way, 500,000 charging stations, I can go on, that are in the American Jobs Plan and the bipartisan infrastructure announcement that you heard about a few weeks ago. So the United States is very much not only behind the long-term targets, but also the critical actions this decade to invest in clean and green technologies, both the tools we have and the tools we need to develop. Let me just close, because I know we have some questions. I want to close by talking about how we collaborate with the European Union, particularly from the standpoint of the private sector. And I will say, having spent some of my time as an expat, I worked in India in the private sector at a renewable energy company. I'm deeply familiar with both the opportunities for American companies. We had American suppliers for some of our asset management operations for renewable energy, for example, but also the challenges that American companies face in foreign markets. The opportunity, however, is enticing. These could be multi-trillion-dollar markets around the world, and it's critical that we make sure that American companies have a fair chance at competing for those enormous markets, not just deploying our innovative technologies at home, but also capturing some of these major markets, shares of these major markets around the world. And Europe's a wonderful place to start. Now, it's not all about competition. I also want to stress that there are areas of collaboration. We can collaborate on international technical standards that help all of us, on pre-competitive research that helps the industry become more innovative as a whole, and on developing safe, secure, and sustainable supply chains so that our companies can collaborate up and down the supply chain and stake out our strategic positions. Fundamentally, I think that the balance between competition and collaboration means that we should focus on growing the whole pie. Again, these will be multi-trillion-dollar markets. And so the more we can do to support American companies, but also support US, EU private sector collaboration, the more that both of our countries and organizations on both sides of the Atlantic are going to benefit from the rising tide of the clean energy transition. So let me pause there, but thrilled to be here, thrilled to share Secretary Kerry's regards and to underscore not only that climate action and ambition are critical to the President Biden administration, but also the competitiveness of American companies abroad and to capturing shares of these multi-trillion-dollar markets to create jobs at home. Thank you. Back over to you, Susan.
Thank you so much, Varun, for that sort of really sort of infused and sort of passionate sort of input, which we're really inspired by. And maybe I can pick up, just take this opportunity to pick up on the word there, collaboration, that you used sort of numerous times. And perhaps, I mean, one thing we were very excited about were some of the outcomes of the recent EUS summit. Indeed, you spoke about the high-level climate change group, but also there was talk of forming this a green technology alliance, and where they could identify areas for closer cooperation and collaboration when it comes to developing green technologies, which is what you've just been talking about. So what do you think this alliance should achieve? Could you give us some idea of what you specifically think they should be aiming at in concrete achievements?
Absolutely. Look, why don't I speak? I'm going to intentionally be a little more generic because, as you can imagine, many of these things are actually under discussion. But what I'll say, generally speaking, is that there are a couple ways to think about this. Our transatlantic technology and energy collaboration can be thought of broken down into topic areas. There are lots of exciting topics that we both think are super important. One of them is the clean hydrogen economy, particularly for these hard to abate areas. And there's a range of other technologies that we think are important. Either the US and individual countries like Germany think are very important, say in the automotive industry, or that we share with the European Union as a whole in terms of some of the high-level strategic priorities that we've seen from the EU. And this includes a range of technologies. I cited some of them. The other way to think of it is in terms of modalities. What are the different ways we might collaborate? Well, we might, as I mentioned a couple of them, we might collaborate on technical standards. It's important, for example, that the US and the European Union assertively step forward, just as some other actors are stepping forward to dominate these standard-setting bodies. It's important that we do that. It'll benefit our firms and it'll open markets. A second modality of collaboration with Europe is research and development. And this is an area where American researchers and European researchers already enjoy thriving collaborations, and we can facilitate that further. A third modality is collaborating on third country approaches. So the United States and the European Union, even though we are currently the world's #2 and #3 emitters, we will account for a dwindling share of emissions if we're successful in what we're trying to do, which is decarbonize our economies. That means that the growing economies in India or in Southeast Asia, that's where the real work has to be done to develop, deploy, finance clean and green technologies. And so we can collaborate on doing that, making sure that technologies that we develop are contextualized for these markets. And finally, a fourth modality is we can promote business-to-business collaboration, both on the research side, but also joint ventures on the supply chain side. So there's really a range of ways to think about it. And I'd like us to think about a conceptual structure that attacks all of these different modalities. It's not, for example, just about research and development. Great question. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, no, thanks, Varun, for that. So, hopefully those are indeed areas where we can collaborate. I'm looking at the time. I've got a couple more questions, actually. Maybe we can combine them both. But one is, where do you see there might be differences in view? So those are some areas where potentially we hope we could collaborate. Do you see areas where we might have some differences? It might be more difficult for the EU and the US to get together?
Well, look, I like to think of it as areas of comparative advantage. You can imagine, the United States has a nuclear industry, and we will continue to support to ensure that we continue to get zero carbon energy from our nuclear plants, and some European Union member states may not. And so that there is an area where we are investing heavily in advanced nuclear technologies. That's an area of U.S. comparative advantage, and there will be some willing markets in Europe and around the world where American technology can be successful. So it's not to say that these divergences necessarily need to preclude cooperation. In cases where there are divergences, the United States is just going to invest in what our comparative advantage is, and our companies are going to do, probably going to do better because of reduced competition. I'll also say that in many areas, it's less difference of opinions and more just difference in context. I think we have a lot to learn from how countries in the European Union, for example, Germany, have been very successful at integrating large penetrations of renewable energy. We should be sharing best practices on virtual power plant design, on grid codes, et cetera. Reflexively, we also ought to be sharing some of the lessons that the United States has learned on our clean energy transition. And so that where we differ in our contexts and approaches offer opportunities, I think, for collaboration.
Thanks, Varun. And maybe one question so on the tip of our tongues for many over here is just looking over at Congress, and we see that President Biden has this, ambitious, you could say aggressive climate agenda, but the majorities of the Democrats in the House and the Senate are really quite slim. So how are you advising the president, or how do you see him navigating that landscape and achieving these ambitions?
Look, fortunately, I'm not the one advising the president. I think Secretary Kerry, that difficult task falls to him. But
sorry, I meant Kerry. Yes.
Yeah. But I do believe they talk constantly about this, and it's a wonderful signal to see the president come out strongly with a bipartisan announcement on areas that we really do agree with. And it's also powerful to see the president's legislative agenda, the priorities he listed out in the American Jobs Plan, and the unity of party behind him. I think the president has an extraordinary standing in his own party and respect across the aisle. If there's anybody who can pull this together, it is President Joe Biden. And, I think it's great that he has folks to talk to with deep experience in the Senate, like Secretary John Kerry, who was formerly Senator John Kerry and continues to have deep relationships on both sides of the aisle. So I don't disagree with you, Susan. It is a difficult position to be in, but forgive my vernacular, ain't no better team to get this done than the one we have right now.
Well, on that very positive note, Varun, thank you so much. I think we're inspired by that. We definitely feel there's a great deal of positive momentum in many ways, and including on the climate agenda. And we very much look forward to being part of that progression. So thank you very much. We know you've got a busy schedule, and we look forward to going to our business speaker now. Inspiring to listen to you. We hope we can connect again, and really hope we can stay in touch over the coming months and years actually on this. So thank you so much, Varun.
Very honored at the invitation, and best of luck to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot. So with that, hi Chris, we have takeoff. So I would like to have now a very warm welcome. This is the challenges of the virtual world. There's always some technical issues somewhere, but we're glad to be able to see you now. We didn't want to just hear from you, Chris. We wanted to see you as well. So with no further ado, I would now like to pass the floor to Chris Delaney, who is President for EMEA of Goodyear and also Chair of our Executive Council here at AmCham EU, so a group of European CEOs, who's now going to introduce the topic of the day, a little bit more, give the business perspective now on clean energy investment and innovation, and bring that business perspective a bit more to light. So thank you very much, Chris. Over to you.
Thank you, Susan. And I'm really happy that the technical issues were solved. Sorry about that. I think we've all been victims of that over the past year and a half. And I look forward to the day that we aren't spending our days in front of a small screen, hopefully soon. But to begin, I really appreciate this opportunity to kind of address this group. I'm actually pretty honored about it. And as I think about what Varun was just sharing with us, I mean, he was really talking about the technologies that are available to both the United States as well as the European Union and how to collaborate on them to, quite frankly, drive this challenge against climate change. My talk here is going to be a little bit on the more practical side, and it's really about how myself and our company, but also many of the AmCham member companies are trying to harness that technology and apply them to problem solving here in the European Union in order to improve our businesses, but at the same time, obviously reduce our carbon footprint. So I begin by asking the simple question, how do we as a company and how do all of the member companies in AmCham continue to provide innovative products and services to the citizens and companies in the European Union while being better stewards for the environment and help combat climate change? Well, I'll share with you some examples that are around the region on how we're doing that. But to begin, obviously the Green Way will require practical solutions for today while driving aspirational thinking for tomorrow to take advantage of those future technologies to solve this thorny question. We'll need to learn together across sectors and leverage the best practices that are within each of our industries, but quite frankly, offered to us as a society within Europe and across the Atlantic to be successful. As part of the Greenway project, we at AmCham are creating an inventory of best practices to help educate as well as inspire both members and non-members alike. Susan and her team have done a great job of compiling a library of examples on the Greenway site, which Susan spoke about during her introduction. And I encourage everyone on this call to browse that site to see the many of the examples that I'll review today. Now, AmCham and its partners and its members have been committed partners to battling climate change, and we continue to invest to reduce our carbon footprint despite the incredible challenges that the business environment has produced for all of us in the past year and a half. Under AmCham's leadership, we've leveraged opportunities like the recent EU-USA summit that Susan was referring to in her remarks, as well as the ongoing transatlantic dialogue that bring key EU leaders together with those of us in the business community to identify opportunities and solutions together. Now, most large companies investing in Europe today have conducted in one way or another a life cycle analysis or an LCA of their operations to understand their own carbon footprint and then identify how to adjust processes or practices to lower carbon emissions in their end-to-end business. One of the first areas that many look at, but especially in the industrial sector that I'm in, is our energy usage and purchase. This work has led to the development of the supply of energy from renewable sources in order to eliminate the natural gas or coal-fired generation sources that many of us use today. It may surprise many on this call that American companies operating in Europe have made more than half of the long-term renewable energy agreements that have been concluded in Europe since 2007. And when our member companies are not sourcing renewable energy, we're contributing directly to making it with world-leading renewable energy generating technologies like the ones that Varun was referring to. We have member companies who are driving the hydrogen revolution with our electrochemical technologies that turn water into hydrogen molecules to power transport, industrial processes, power, and even heating. Our members in the financial sector are not absent from the effort as well. Our financial sector members are committing ever more portions of their investment portfolios to sustainable projects and ensuring their investments into capital or equity projects reward companies that are reducing their carbon footprint. And we also have tech and innovation companies in our membership who are using the powers of 5G and blockchain technologies to better integrate renewable energy into the grid, as well as use artificial intelligence and smart sensors to detect leaks of harmful gases in early warning systems. Now, we at Goodyear have been operating in Europe for a little bit over 70 years, having established our first factory as part of the Marshall Plan after the Second World War. That initial investment has now grown into a €5.5 billion turnover business with 13 EU-based factories, 4 innovation and product development centers, and employing over 20,000 associates. We consider Europe as a strategic center for innovation, given the sophistication of our automotive, commercial truck, and aviation customers in the region. In recent years, due to the passion and leadership which Europe has displayed in the climate change battle, including the commitment being made by the governments in Europe, as well as the citizens of the European Union to advance the Green Deal and circular economy, our region has become a thought leader in developing sustainable solutions, not just for my company and industry, but throughout industry in Europe. In 2020, Goodyear was able to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions across all of our operations by 20% as compared to a 2010 baseline. We viewed that as a good start. I'm proud to share that we recently announced that we're working together with an energy supplier called Innovos, a European company, to build 2 large solar power stations at our R&D Innovation Center in Colmerberg, Luxembourg, which will provide clean energy for our R&D facilities there, our factory, as well as our offices throughout Luxembourg, as well as provide excess energy to the Luxembourg citizens who are our neighbors. When finished, both stations will produce annually about 5 gigawatts of electric power and reduce carbon emissions by around 50,000 tons over the next 20 years, while providing clean energy for nearly 1,200 households annually. By the end of 2021, we will source 100% of all of our electricity needs in the 13 tire plants and our 40 offices around Europe, accessing green energy sources, saving approximately 300 tons of CO2. And we don't expect to do this all alone. In 2020, furthering our commitment to build the future mobility of Goodyear Ventures, we established a $100 million fund dedicated to accelerating future solutions that help increase sustainability, not just in us as a company, but in our industry, to make life connections easier every day. To articulate Goodyear's role in the future of mobility, we focused on developing great products and services that anticipate and respond to the needs of our consumers. In 2020, one of the most important things to our customers was a reduction in rolling resistance. Now, rolling resistance is a measure of friction between your tire and the road. The reason this is important is because the rolling resistance of a tire could change the energy efficiency of a vehicle by up to 10%. And it positively contributes to that vehicle's fuel efficiency, as well as being critically important in helping electric vehicles in Europe maximize their range and efficiency. Last but not least, by 2030, we aim to develop a 100% sustainable material and maintenance-free tire. Now, these projects are our contribution to the Green Way, but obviously they're just one of many inside AmCham. And these projects are never ending. It will take teamwork and commitment by all of us to make them happen. While the political ambition of the Green Deal may be new, the research, innovation, expertise, and investments from the private sector has long been paving the way for the Green Way in Europe's sustainable future. And as business leaders, we see great opportunities ahead for both multinational companies, but with strong transatlantic relations being essential to that success. With a shared vision on how to tackle climate change, political leaders on both sides of the Atlantic play a crucial role in ensuring an enabling regulatory environment. It will take all of us working together and learning from one another to drive the Green Way. Thank you very much for listening today, and I very much look forward to hearing the panel discussion and learning more about EU's role and all of our role in helping drive a more sustainable future. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that. I think it's always one of the most valuable things we can do, which is to hear the case studies and the actual examples of what businesses are doing. And I mean, I learned a lot from that. Really impressive of the figures and especially this maintenance-free tire, Chris. As somebody who's got to have my tire repaired tomorrow, and I've got an appointment for that, I would love a maintenance-free tire, as well as one from sustainable materials. So I noted that down. But in all seriousness, thank you very much. But
you're welcome, Susan. And Susan, we'll reserve one for you, first one off the line.
I'm not joking. I had a nail in it at the weekend. So yeah, thanks for that. But it's really good to hear firsthand from businesses. I hope the audience appreciated that too. I mean, I think also importantly, Chris, you really elucidated why it's so important for regulators also to have open dialogue with industry if we're going to get the regulatory frameworks right going forward. So it's exactly what we need. And if we are going to have any success in tackling the global scale problem of climate change, also, as we heard from Varun, we need transatlantic cooperation on this. So absolutely essential. So with that, Chris, thank you so much. And as always, looking forward to continuing the work with you. So with that, it's now my pleasure. We're only actually just not even late on this. Really looking forward now to our panel. And with that, I am going to give the floor to Zega Fakutaran, who is Vice President for Worldwide Government Affairs at Johnson & Johnson, who's also Chair of AmCham EU, who is going to moderate the panel coming up, and he'll introduce the panelists, but I would like to thank them personally myself. So thanks to both of the ladies who are going to join the panel. Before I hand over to you, Zega, just a quick reminder to everybody, if you do have a question, please do put it in the chat function, and Zega will certainly try to address a few of these at the end of the session. So with that, over to you, Zega. Looking forward to it.
Thanks a lot, Susan, and good afternoon, everybody, again, and a warm welcome also to our panelists, Svetlina Penkova and Annika Hedberg, for today's discussion on clean energy investment and innovation. We've heard the two are important, and I'm really delighted to be in such a good company. I think we kicked off very strongly with Varun and Chris, who really gave us a very upbeat but also very interesting insight, and it's a space that is moving very rapidly. And so Mrs. Penkova, or Svetlina, is a Bulgarian member of the European Parliament who sits in the S&D group and works in the ITRE Committee on Research and Energy Issues. Very relevant for this discussion, and welcome, Svetlina. And then Annika, who I know very well as well, is head of Sustainable Prosperity for Europe. And not to be confused, she's at the European Policy Center here in Brussels. Thank you both for being with us today. And really the way we're going to do this is maybe asking you first a couple of questions from my end, but then we'll hope to make this very interactive with the audience we have here with us today. But before we dive in, I would like to reiterate, really like Chris did, really the importance that all AmCham EU member companies, and so does my company, attaches to green transition and to decarbonizing our operations and supply chains. And the sustainable energy reform impacts manufacturers across all the economic sectors, as also Chris highlighted this, and not only those that are active in the energy sector. And I think it's important to highlight this. And we will only be possible if we all invest in it and contribute to this. And I mean, the staggering figures that Varun was sharing with us for the next 10 years, how that would line up, we all understand what that challenge is that we have ahead of us. But we at my company, Johnson & Johnson, we know that human health is fundamentally linked to the health of the planet. And we are committed to environmental health and responsible use of natural resources since, I mean, more than 30 years. And we have a long-standing commitment there. And one of our targets is to source 100% of our electricity needs from renewable sources by 2025. And I'm excited to share with you an important milestone that we reached today, especially, that will accelerate us towards that goal. And Johnson & Johnson has just announced 3 new wind and solar power purchase agreements that will secure 100% renewable electricity for all the Johnson & Johnson owned sites in Europe by 2023. And I can tell you there are many. These contracts are basically for new built wind and solar resources, which without our company's investment would not have been financed or developed. This will add an approximate 270,000 megawatt hours of clean power each year to our electricity portfolio. So we are very proud of this achievement. We have many more efforts from the AmCham EU members to share today, and we have already heard Chris sharing very impressive ones as well. And I encourage you, really, like Susan was doing, to check out the Green Way campaign of AmCham EU Invested in Europe platform. We have, seen through that platform that, you see very many different examples from my company. For example, the first ever carbon neutral site in Helsingborg, Sweden, where we actually managed to reduce energy spent while increasing production by more than 25%. Furthermore, for example, in Belgium, we have implemented a geothermal energy installation that uses energy from hot water within the earth to power our world-class industrial site in the north of Belgium, this country. This has reduced our carbon footprint there by 30%. But it's not just about Johnson & Johnson's effort for sure. I can talk for hours about, like Chris did, all the more than 35 initiatives, and it's still adding every day, that AmCham EU member companies are sharing in terms of how they are undertaking to make the green transition happen. So let's now turn to the panel. And let me start with you, Svetlina. So with the Fit for 55 package that everybody is anxiously waiting for, and that is set to be released tomorrow, as we understand, what do you think will be the most important elements of this package? And what are you hoping, you yourself, to see coming through there? You're still
Thank you. Yes, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Zeger. So first of all, I would like to thank both you and Chris for pinpointing on the fact that we need an open dialogue with the business from the regulatory side, I mean, because sharing the practices and us being able to put the right regulatory framework is crucial. And this is the short answer basically to your question, that the most important thing to have a proper and efficient green transition now is to have a regulatory framework that's consistent within all the member states. And the second very important bit here is the predictability of the regulatory framework, especially when we're speaking about green transition, about energy transition, and about the investors' long-term considerations in terms of commitments. I think the predictability in the regulatory framework is quite important. That's why most probably the important aspect of the Fit for 52 package is the final goal, which it has set, is reaching the EU 2030 goal of cutting the emissions by 55% and putting us on track to achieve the net zero emission by 2050. The aim of the package itself is to reduce the loopholes that exist in the current EU legislative framework with both revision of old documentation and introduction of new ones. The main problem here could come from the co-legislative process, which would be raised mainly because of the conflicts between the member states, the Commission, and the political parties in the Parliament. So that's the risk here, that we might come up with incomplete results. So it's quite important that we all understand the final goal and be able to put it correctly, rather than have a package which is based only on compromises and it's not workable for the business, and most importantly for the society and for the people. So we should be quite careful to not create a Frankenstein of legislative package, which would make the energy and the green transition even more difficult to facilitate. So I think this would be our main challenge. But the big important bit is the clear and targetable goals, and the fact that it would be working on updating old legislation that is already in place and introducing new one when there is a need for one.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. I mean, music to our ears, I would say. The open dialogue, predictability, clear, really targetable metrics, and then making sure that we don't end up in the usual European compromise, which is not necessarily leading to the best outcome. So thanks for that. So Annika, the existing climate and energy framework targets, I mean, if we talk about it, they target the framework targets, a share of 32% renewable energy resources and another 32.5% improvement in energy efficiency. How do you expect these targets, if you have some insider information, could be adjusted in tomorrow's Fit for 55 package? And what kind of incentives do you think should be available for the industry?
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm happy to be here. I can't just but agree with the importance of whatever comes out tomorrow, and overall with the messages that we want to send out about the EU's climate and energy framework for 2030, but also as we go towards 2050. It's very important that there are very clear signals and coherent approach coming from policymakers on the direction of travel. And maybe I could just say that we still have a number of contradictions we need to address if we wish to have these clear signals and coherent approach. For example, the EU still continues to subsidize fossil fuels, and across EU member states, we see fossil fuels-based heating being subsidized as an example. So if we really are serious about incentivizing renewable energy, electrifying, greening energy consumption in buildings, supporting electrification of mobility, the messages, those targets, the financial incentives are very important. And here I would just like to say that let's start by removing support for fossil fuels as starters. Maybe I could just say that industry in Europe has traditionally been very good in making its own Europe-based operations energy efficient because of the relatively high price of energy in Europe. And although more can always be done, the areas where we need to increase efforts are in making building stock, but also mobility more energy efficient. And here it is initiatives like Renovation Wave and the attached funding and targets for electromobility that are important in accelerating deployment of energy efficient solutions on a grand scale.
Okay, thanks a lot. And we heard from Chris there already. Some part of it are working very hard on this, so that's a good linkage. And Caterina, you have recently been appointed shadow rapporteur for your party group on the review of the EU industrial strategy within the ITRE committee. Now, how important a role will innovation play within this strategy? We heard from Varun that innovation is going to be really critical, even innovation either to scale up or even to develop. And so if you think particularly of already the impact the European industry will have to absorb after the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, so how do you see this all coming together?
So first of all, I would like to point out as well to what you've said in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic and its influence on both the society and the industry in any aspect. So we saw that the innovation and the technological advancements did help us quite a lot to be able to continue functioning, do our work, and to have the transition rather smoother than it would have happened without the technological advancement. Of course, we understand that this is not possible for every sector of the economy to implement technologies like home office environment or like working online. This is not applicable for every sector. We understand that. So our goal would be to try to optimize as much as possible the processes that could lead to more efficient and flexible work environment within that strategy. We hope that the people would be able to find the balance in that new normal we're going to be trying to set up there. In terms of one of the main focuses which we would defend when we develop that strategy would be supporting technologies that would enable the EU's strategic autonomy by investing in local SMEs, because they were one of the most affected by the pandemic due to the fact that they couldn't have the reliability on big enough capital reserves that would help them sustain without the normal functioning in an environment of a complete lockdown. So in that matter, we would need strong public support in the industrial sector, so we can safeguard the livelihood of the society and the people who are employed in those SMEs as well. So I think the focus in Europe now would be in terms of the many financial support opportunities that we're providing would be really towards the smaller businesses and smaller enterprises that suffered the most from the pandemic.
Yeah. And if you see now the Commission is in the process of reviewing and approving the member states' spending plans as part of the economic recovery drive. So how can the EU economic recovery plan ensure cleaner but also more accessible and affordable energy for all the member states?
That's quite a difficult question, but so definitely in terms of the both the industries and low income households, that's one of the key elements when we speak about the, as you said, about the financial support and about the regulatory framework. So it's important to mention here that when we speak about energy efficiency, we shouldn't just be thinking about changing the type of light bulbs that we use or changing the facades of the buildings. It is a rather more deeper concern, and in general, I believe that we should rethink the way our energy supply is organized at the moment. In terms of, we should move from the centralized toward decentralized system, which means that basically the consumers could produce part of the energy they're using. That's one way in which we could consider investments in projects which would allow that for the consumers in a matter that's gonna have reduce the energy poverty. That definitely is going to happen now in certain parts of Europe where they're dependent more on the fossil fuels, or where we see the increase in the prices of electricity due to the taxes on the emissions that are also increasing at this point.
Yeah, no, but that's probably also then seeing foregoing some of the natural income streams of government. So they will need to reflect about that as a result. But Annika, from your writing, you see enormous potential for alignment between the EU's green and digital transition policies, two of the main pillars, right? So in your view, how can digitalization further enhance climate action, particularly in the context of the energy sector then?
Thank you. What we've seen is that we've actually, in Europe, we've been promoting the green and digital transitions for a very long time. And for way too long, it's actually have been seen as two separate transitions. And when it comes to policies and public spending, we haven't actually been very good in ensuring that data and digital solutions are used to address our sustainability challenges, to bring about real change in our economy and society. So there is enormous potential. If we did use the power of digitalization to solve these challenges, if we refocused at the twin green and digital transition to really aligning these agendas and creating a framework that encourages businesses, but also cities and people to turn digitalization into a real enabler for sustainability, there's great benefits to be taken from this. And indeed, we've at EPC, in the last years, we've been looking at the potential with using digitalization as a means to address our sustainability challenges. And we see that the possibilities are enormous. Better management of data and deployment of digital solutions can provide the means to enable and even accelerate the transition to a more sustainable economy. And they can help contribute to system change in our not just energy systems, but in our food, and mobility systems as well. And so if we look at just the energy system transition, we can see that digitalization offers many possibilities for enabling smart grids, in enabling demand response, and as such empowering consumers to play a more active role, especially with improving energy efficiency. And we see that there's, for example, great role that blockchain could play in offering prospects to help producers and consumers contribute to the clean energy transition, including development and uptake of renewables. So just to say, we see that there's enormous potential and that we could try to build on, and we should try to build on.
Do you think, Annika, that in this, I mean, we just heard from Varun, these kind of the green tech platform that is being set up between the US and the EU. In those areas, do you see particular importance of collaboration between the two blocks?
Absolutely. I think that ultimately we operate in a global world. We need global collaboration, and especially when it comes to digitalization, there are great prospects. For example, obviously EU is very keen on looking at, for example, ethical AI and role that AI can play. And I would argue that, for example, expanding this into a discussion about sustainable AI, how can we use algorithms in a way that actually they enhance sustainability? How can we use overall digital solutions in a way that they actually help to address our most fundamental sustainability challenges? This really would benefit from global collaboration. You could say that in some aspects, the EU at times is being criticized as lacking behind in the digital transition, but there actually are areas where the EU is quite advanced. We see great efforts being done around blockchain, and that's an area where the EU can certainly collaborate and can provide ideas on how we can use blockchain to, for example, increase transparency in global value chains. The same comes with industrial IoT, industrial AI, where we see that actually European businesses are quite advanced, often using these kind of solutions to actually make the industry, the business models themselves more sustainable. So there's certainly great potential for collaboration across Atlantic here as well.
Yeah, and as with AmCham EU, we brought to life when just before the EU-US summit, Secretary of Commerce from the US, as well as Commissioner Breton, got together, and we brought together a whole mix of US corporation partnering with even small and medium-sized enterprises in Europe on this digital partnership, but also larger European companies that are also active on the US side in partnerships in, I mean, be it a digital partnership or supply chain resilience and so forth. So we brought that to life to show that really we all kind of tap into each other and it's interconnected. But maybe I just want to encourage the audience to post your questions. I'm going to very quickly turn to you. And maybe a last final question from my side to both panelists is, what in your opinion is the recipe for a successful energy transition in Europe? Are you confident, optimistic that the EU will be able to achieve its ultimate target of net neutrality by 2050? And let's start maybe with Svetlina.
So I think we've set quite an ambitious target, but at the same time, the EU with its regulation is giving enough of a time frame to help the society and the industry itself to prepare. And also, let's not forget the topic about the Green Deal and the green transition is not for the last year or two. It's been a discussion and something that's been happening in many parts of Europe for many years. If we look back in terms of the investment in renewable energy, alternative sources of energy, and all the measures and technological advancement that's been happening on that matter. In terms of how the energy transition could be successful, I think it would be successful only if we managed to fulfill two requirements. The first one is to manage to find the most cost-efficient mix of energy carriers for each industry. And here I'm speaking about integration of renewable, nuclear, gas, hydrogen, biofuels in the most efficient way, so that we can reduce to the maximum the greenhouse emission. This is the first condition. And the second condition is that we should manage to reduce the social inequalities instead of increasing them, of course. And for that matter, in terms of what the EU is doing, we have a lot of support measures. I'm just going to give one example, which is the Just Transition Fund. This is the financial support provided to the member states to help them switch their energy mix from the dependency on fossil fuels to alternative sources of energy. And it's important here that the bigged portion and amount of this fund is dedicated to help the workers employed in those types of industries. So it's more on the social aspect, because as Zege, you rightfully pointed out that the national authorities should be also quite active in implementing this transition. So the EU is trying to support in terms of like the economic impact, the social transition, the technological advancement. However, each of the countries should be able also to budget that transition in terms of the long-term perspectives that it has. So I'm pretty sure if we're all responsible, we could reach those ambitious goals in the not that short, I would say, time framework that we have set in front of us.
Very good. So optimistic. Good to hear, Svetlina. So Annika, are you different?
Oh, I'm realistic, I guess. This won't be easy. I would say that when it comes to climate and environmental goals, we see that the EU's track record tends to be in missing the goals it has set for itself. This is well portrayed in the latest European Environment Agency's State of the Environment report. So this combined with the complexity of the challenge makes me realistic. This really won't be easy. But we do see that there is very strong momentum at the moment across the EU. We see this on the highest level and it's trickled down. And it's very important that the EU remains very clear about the direction of travel, but also about the benefits for business and people that this transition can bring about. And it's essential. It's you could say that it's easier to set targets. The tricky part when we start talking about the measures that will need to be taken and then actually implementing them. So now we are in the process. We have set for ourselves the grand goals, and now we need to make sure that the measures that are taken will be aligned with these goals. And we need to make sure that the implementation will be there. And here I'm looking especially at EU member states. We will require national, local leadership, real commitment at the national level to see through the agreed measures. And the social dimension has been mentioned. So I'll like to also highlight the importance of getting people on board. We won't achieve the 2030 and the 2050 goals if people, be it citizens or workers, regions, do not participate in this effort. And so this is not just about making funds available for regions in transition, but really ensuring that the concerns and needs of people are being heard. We need to engage with them. We need to incentivize them to play a role. And ultimately, we need to make it easy for people to contribute in the transition. So in an ideal world, every product and a service on the European market would be sustainable, so that people wouldn't need to think about their climate and environmental footprints. So this is really the big grand challenge. And I would also like to just say, because we are talking about innovation here today, so obviously we need to continue to invest in innovation and continue to improve current low carbon solutions and develop new. But I tend to belong to those that believe that we don't actually need to wait for new innovations or wild cards like fusion energy to accelerate the transition. we have solutions to make this change happen. And if we look at renewable energies, if we look at the already existing solutions for greening, electrifying our mobility, or improving energy consumption in buildings, these are examples that show that the solutions are already there. And often the challenge for us is actually deploying them, actually getting them, scaling them up. So this is essential, and the next test case for EU. How do we help to scale those existing solutions so that they can be solutions for addressing our challenges? And I'll finish off just by saying that obviously achieving EU's goals will be dependent on what happens in the global context. We do need to cooperate across borders. But I am very confident, and where I am optimistic is that the EU currently is very committed to deliver. And while it continues to reflect and debate on the measures to be taken, and I'm not just talking about energy transition here, I do see that the direction is very clear, and the will of the EU policymakers is there to make this happen.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. And I mean, yeah, one thing you pointed out is engaging the regions, the countries, the citizens, and so forth. That's where we're going to be depending on. There's 27 very different approaches probably, and that's where, I mean, some of the vulnerability could be coming from again. So, but I see we have questions lined up. We have Susan and we have Chris. So let's take that in that order. So Susan, if you want to ask your question, and then I'll turn to Chris.
Yes, good afternoon, ladies. Thank you so much. It was a fascinating panel, really good listening to your inputs. I think part of my question may have been answered a little bit because you've been focusing on the sort of social impact. But if you want to add anything to that about, just basically making sure no one's left behind. And I know, Svetlana, that was your focus there. So maybe in addition to that, Annika, you just mentioned then you're a realist of whether it's going to be successful or not, but said, well, the benefits need to be made clear. Now, I would challenge you on that. So I'm not sure, do you think the benefits are clear? They might be clear in this sort of Brussels bubble. Are they really clear outside, perhaps to those who stand to lose out? I'm not convinced. There are skeptics out there. What's in it for those who have less? Why should they enter into this? Why should they make an effort? So are those benefits clear to everyone? Will be my question. And if not, what do we need to do about it?
Shall I respond? And maybe I'll just very shortly just say that unfortunately, I don't think the benefits are clear. I think that we continue to fail to actually communicate the benefits, the societal benefits, the climate, the environmental, the economic benefits. And it's also, I think people are also confused by the fact that, as I mentioned before, we're not always coherent in our approaches. So our policies are also sending out at times contradictory messages, where it makes it even more difficult for people themselves to know what is exactly the direction, as well as obviously for businesses on kind of where are we heading. But I would say this, I always like to kind of bring in for businesses, I would like to remind that obviously we know the direction where we're going, and it is also about the global commitment that we've set for ourselves. We have the Paris Climate Agreement, we have the Sustainable Development Goals that provide us the context, they provide us the direction where we need to go. They provide us also the rationale, the reasoning why we need to act, and the urgency for action. I think that it's very clear that there is no time to waste if we actually want to make sure that there will be prosperity and well-being, not only for the future generations, but already for the existing generations. So if you dig a bit deeper, I think that the rationale for action and the urgency for action is there. But we need to go beyond this, obviously, to communicate the immediate benefits for people, because the reality is that whatever measures we're going to be taking, there will be transitional costs. And we already see this. And when the Fit for 55 package will be put forward tomorrow, I can just imagine the headlines across EU member states on what this is going to cost, how your energy bills are going to increase, what kind of extra cost this will bring in for mobility. So the policymakers need to be prepared. And that's why also I was referring to the responsibility of local leaders to communicate what are the benefits in terms of improving air quality, improving actually the economic situation on a local, on a national level, by the fact that we actually are going to be addressing some of the greatest health impacts of our current mobility system. So it is about changing the narrative and not being on defensive, but actually saying that there are enormous benefits that these changes, these legislations, these measures are going to bring. And these are not just for the future generations, but that people can feel the immediate benefits come tomorrow. So it is really, I think that it's also about changing and turning the narrative into positives rather than being on defensive.
Yeah, you want to say something, Svetlina? Maybe.
I think, yes. Yeah, I think Annika was quite detailed in her response. I just want to add something in terms of the fact if people see the benefits for them in that green transition. I believe that even with the lockdown now and what we've seen that was caused by the pandemic, the air quality was drastically improved just in a matter of a couple of weeks in some of the big cities across Europe. And I think people actually realized how much of an impact our way of life and the constant pollution from the transportation we're using, or for some of the ways the industry is shaped, they just seen the actual impact on that. That was one addition that I think the realization bit might be could happen a bit faster just because of that precedent we had. And also interestingly for me, because I spoke a bit about the SMEs and about startups, I would just give one example from my country, from Bulgaria, which did impress me quite a lot. Speaking with the association which are involving the startups in Bulgaria, for instance, and we're speaking about more than 600 startups that they have united at the moment, which might not seem like a massive number, but it's still significant with those projects led by young people. And they did tell me that at the moment, between 20 and 30% of those startups are focusing on green projects, on energy efficiency in terms of technological development, or some methods that could help us reach that. Which means that if the younger generation is already convinced, and when they're looking for entrepreneurial opportunities, they're focusing on that aspect, it means that a big part of the society is already in the right track in realizing the importance of that for our future.
Very good point. And we heard from SMEs recently, and they said really, I mean, aligning standards and regulatory systems between the US and Europe is really critical to find an approachable market. But also, I mean, Europe is short on capital to help these companies pick up and do the necessary investments. And so that's also then an area that we need to support the startup with. So, but turning to Chris for your question, and if you want to direct it to one of the panelists specifically, please indicate. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Edgar. And thank you very much, Annika and Svetlina. I mean, I've really enjoyed your comments. And I actually want to piggyback a little bit different than what I put in the dialogue box based on what you both just said. It's very clear that the social benefits are at the heart of everything that we're doing here. You know, at the end of the day, this is about preserving, you know, the quality of life, not for ourselves, but for our children, our grandchildren, and generations to come. And I don't think anybody who's on this call wouldn't agree with that in some principle. So my comments are less about whether it's worth the pain, because it obviously is, but the practicalities of getting from where we are today to where we're going to. And obviously, you know, the examples that you heard today, whether it was Zegers whether it was the ones that I shared with some of our other um, member companies, or whether it was my own companies, there's a significant on cost that the European consumer has said they're willing to pay, and that the European society says they're willing to pay. And we're all encouraged that there appears to be a better dialogue across the Atlantic. So there may be a transatlantic way to lead here. However, neither the United States nor Europe compete in a vacuum. And we're part of a global trading system, and we're part of a global business environment. And the practicalities of those of us that are on kind of the bottom of the food chain in business on the ground is we've got to compete every day and make it to that beautiful end state, decades from now in 2050 when we reach carbon neutrality. In the meantime, as those of us that are believing or encouraging our companies to invest to help reduce the carbon emissions of our businesses, there's an on cost to that. There's a reason why people are accessing fossil fuels. It is the cheaper, most efficient way from a pure dollars and cents or a euro and cents basis to get there. So as businesses believe and join this, it's an observation as much as a question, but I would be interested in both panelists' perspective on it. How do you ensure the businesses that are investing, whether they're SMEs or whether they are large multinationals, have a level playing field relative to who they are competing with inside the single market? It's a very difficult request, but I think it's easy to write the legislation sometimes. It's very hard to do it in a way that doesn't disadvantage someone operating. And I'll give you a practical example in my own industry. Over the past 15 years, the single fastest growing segment of the tire industry has actually been imports from Asia. Okay. And there's a plain and simple reason for that. It's a very labor intensive manufacturing process. Every tire is literally made by a tire builder. And quite frankly, accessing significantly, lower cost labor and quite frankly, lower cost capital has undermined the industry significantly. And whether you talk to Michelin, you talk to Bridgestone, you talk to, Continental in Germany, will all be able to tell you that same trend. That will be accelerated here. Now, my industry, I don't really necessarily want you to respond to my industry, but are there any thoughts or ideas about how we support the businesses that are supporting the Green Deal and the circular economy, and at the same time understand how do we protect our businesses to get to the other side?
So maybe very short interaction from the two panelists. Any?
Of course, you wouldn't expect a precise or a clear-cut answer to that. I imagine you understand it's a difficult question. I would just bring us a bit back in time when we were discussing the climate law. The EU was the first political formation that introduced the climate law, and then we had the same discussion. If this is not going to destroy the EU's competitiveness in terms of industry, business, when we impose that. Interestingly enough, following the climate law that was introduced in the EU, then we had the US quite closely following us in terms of introducing the same type of regulations. And now we've seen that India is also setting up the targets for that, which means that in terms of the regulatory framework, Europe is amongst the leaders for setting that, and we should, of course, keep up that in order to protect the business and the companies on that matter. But I believe that if we speak about a regulation that everyone should follow, how we do support the businesses that do have that in their principal way of acting, the easy answer to that would be by giving them access to additional financial support with the different projects and the different packages Europe is offering. Because what we observe in Europe now with any financial support, that it's out there one of the biggest requirements is for those projects or companies to be green or to be with the focus on technologies, as Zeger said, the two main pillars. So that's the easy answer to that. The second bit is it might be a bit more abstract, but we're hoping that if we have the right policies in place and if we have the support of the society in terms of the way consumers would change their behavior, would be more towards supporting companies which are compliant, to say the regulatory word for that, with that new trend. And you can easily see that, especially in the younger consumers. But is there going to be a disadvantage for certain sectors that couldn't adapt, or it's just impossible for them to adapt because of the cost efficiency and the kind of reliability on certain fuels, especially the fossil fuels, which they cannot easily switch? Yes, there's going to be a disadvantage to that. But it's important to clarify here that when we're speaking about net zero emissions, we're not completely speaking about cutting off all the emissions. Net zero means that we need to kind of counter effect that. So we're not speaking about the complete wrap up of all the fossil fuels. We understand that some industries are quite dependent on them, so we cannot completely cut them off that grid. But it's kind of trying to find a more balanced mix in terms of that.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you. Was there anything, Annika, you wanted to quickly comment on?
Maybe I could just quickly say that I think that it is the change that we're currently seeing. It is happening so quick. The world has really changed in the last few years. And with these international climate commitments that are coming on the table, what we really are seeing is a race to the top at the moment. The international climate commitments provide the context, and we see that the market is growing for sustainable solutions. So this is no longer just the EU trying to push its agenda, but we really see that there is a global buy-in and global demand growing for sustainable solutions. And what I would suggest, as I mentioned before, the Paris Climate Agreement, the SDGs, provide us the direction, and I would say that they provide the direction for every industry across the world. This is the direction where we're going, and the benefits are up for taking for those who are keen to increase their ambition, lead the way, and that can provide sustainable products and the services that the world needs today and tomorrow. But I fully recognize that there is a transitional period and there are going to be transitional costs, and it is about just finding the right time when to invest and where to invest. And this is obviously a challenge that the EU is trying to battle with as well. The EU has shown the power of policies and how policies and investments can thrive and support change, but obviously the EU itself is at the same time battling with this, that how can it at the same time help to support industry in Europe, ensure competitiveness in Europe. We don't want industry to escape the European market because of the increased demands on our market. So it is a very fair balance that we're seeing. And I think that as we are waiting for the Fit for 55 package coming out tomorrow to really make the Green Deal goals a reality, it is very important that what we mentioned before is that the direction of travel is clear and there is coherent approach. There are clear demand signals for innovators, for businesses, and it's essential that the EU continues to work together with other countries, other key emitters beyond its borders, with the aim that we want to create a global enabling framework for the transition, global market for the products and solutions we desperately need. And there are ways to do that: trade, international carbon trading, international standards. There are so many ways for EU to collaborate with others that we really need to continue to build on.
Okay. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. I'm sure I see still the audience wanting to come in, and I really would want to continue this very rich and engaging discussion. It's definitely a complex area, but I'll stick with what Svelina in the beginning pointed out. Is really critical. It's the predictability, the open dialogue. I think we need to be agile, learning fast, changing eventually if it isn't working, looking at, as Annika said, the financial but also the market incentives that are going to be needed. and not working in isolation, but really, I mean, leveraging, I mean, there is solutions today, and there is going to be needing further R&D and upscaling needed. And all of this needs to come together in an ecosystem where everybody needs to engage, nobody left behind. But really, AmCham.eu wants to play a key role in there with all of you engaging this and being critical, but at the same time, highly supportive, as you will already see. And again, a call to check out our campaign. But allow me just to extend my gratitude once more to our great panelists, to Svetlina Penkova, honorary member of the European Parliament, Annika Hedberg, head of the Sustainable Prosperity for Europe at the EPC, and really for joining us today, carving out time for us and offering your expert insight on a very lively topic. So over to you, Susan, to close the session today, and thanks to the audience for being there.
Yes, so thank you, Zager. Well, there's not too much left to say, just to say I think it was a really rich discussion. I had lots of C words down here, actually. I think, Varun mentioned competition and collaboration, Annika, coherent approach and avoid those contradictions. We had consumer behavior from Svetlina, context being global. I was trying to think of a C for you, Chris, but Chris is a C himself. But I think the main word that came out from Chris Delaney was level playing field. Chris's level playing field, and Zager, indeed, it's a challenge, but I think the word then confident came out from Annika at some point, to saying, who's a realist, lots of challenges, but we're confident we can get there. But and I think importantly, someone mentioned a lot of the solutions already there, Annika. We have to work on those. But with that, I would just like to thank you, Zager, for the great moderation. Thank you, Chris, Svetlina, and Annika. Everyone who's still left on the call, be sure to check out the Invested in Europe platform. Watch for the next events. We're going to roll out several more events like this and the campaign during the year. So look forward to seeing you after the summer. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye for now.